ask you to... Distinguished guests, members of the Diplomatic Corps, corporate members of the Lowy Institute, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to this address by Senator the Honourable Don Farrell, the Minister for Trade and Tourism and the Special Minister for State. I'm Michael Fullilove, the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the Institute stands, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2022, when the Albanese government was first elected, a key foreign policy challenge was to stabilise the relationship with China. You'll recall that Beijing had subjected us to a campaign of economic intimidation and trade blockages. We had been placed in the diplomatic deep freeze, and the Chinese people were missing out on wonderful Australian product like lobster and beef and wine. Thankfully, those trade barriers have now been removed. In 2025, after decisively winning a second term, the Albanese government faces a very different set of challenges. The relationship with China has stabilised. Now some of the greatest trade disturbances in the world are emanating from the United States. Public opinion reflects these changing circumstances. In this year's Lowy Institute poll, only 36% of Australians now trust the United States to act responsibly, a 20-point drop since last year and the lowest level on record. However, 80% of Australians still believe that the alliance is important to our security. Of course, Australia's new foreign policy challenges are accompanied by new opportunities. We are looking to quicken our defence and trade connections with Europe. We have the chance to capitalise on the energy transition, and there are tremendous opportunities for us in our own region, the Indo-Pacific. In this context, we're delighted to welcome the Trade Minister, Senator the Honourable Don Farrell. Before entering politics, Don made his career in the Labor movement as a senior official with the SDA, the Shoppies, of which he was State Secretary for 15 years. I told Don that from the age of 15 I was a trolley boy and then a checkout worker at Woolies, and I didn't really know what the SDA was, but I found myself automatically enrolled as a member. So your systems were working well. Since Don was first elected to the Senate in 2008, he served in a number of ministerial portfolios, including as Minister for Science and Research and Minister for Sport. And for the past 3 years, he served as Minister for Trade and Tourism and Special Minister of State. He's also a vintner. He owned a beautiful winery in the Clare Valley, which I think was formerly run by the Jesuits, if I'm not wrong. And he produced a Cabernet Sauvignon called The Godfather too. The Godfather may or may not be one of Don's aliases. Perhaps he'll address that in his remarks. But in addition to that, Senator Farrell will lay out the government's second-term trade agenda and then take our questions. Minister, the lectern is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for that terrific introduction. If you'd been a bit younger and working at Woolies, I picked up a fella called Peter Malinauskas. And so if I'd met you, a few years earlier, I could have given you the opportunity to become Premier of South Australia, or in your case, Premier of New South Wales. But thank you for that very kind introduction. As I said to you earlier today, your book is on my front counter, and I regularly refer to it, and I'm looking forward to your next book on John Kennedy. So it's going to be great. Great to see you all here today. I should welcome a few people. There's Paul Grimes. Paul has just newly taken over Austrade, and in my experience, one of the finest public servants I have ever met in my life. And I know he's doing a fantastic job with Austrade in really difficult circumstances. George Mina over there. George, I give credit to George as the person who made the breakthrough with China. He gets no credit for this, but he went to the head of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi, and said, how about teeing up a meeting between me and the Chinese? And that was the start of the breakthrough that we got to get that $20 billion worth of trade back into China. And congratulations on that, George. I see my old friend Craig Emerson there, former Trade Minister. I love reading your stories, whether it's, AFR, New Daily, especially the ones that mention me, and they're very good. And, of course, my two Senate colleagues. It's great to see you here, the newly elected whip of the Senate, Tony Sheldon, and my great friend, Deb O'Neill. There's John Hopkins at the back there from the Export Finance Australia. One of the reasons we've been such a successful country in exporting our products is the work John does, and that's great work. But welcome to you all. What a time to be talking about tariffs and trade. What we discovered during the last election was that I was on a group that would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd get the results of the night before polling, and what we discovered during the course of that period was that people, Australians, when they woke up in the morning, they were no longer looking at Australian news, but the first thing they do is look up American news, and of course to see what was happening in the United States. And I suspect not much has changed since that time. So I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I think that is a very honourable thing to do. Thank you, Michael, for the invitation to speak at the Lowy Institute. I've come here many times as a visitor, seeing other speakers, and it's great to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. Australia is a trading nation. From the first known trading networks between Indigenous Australians in Northern Australia and the Makassar of Indonesia, to the Australian wool, which helped clothe the world in the early 20th century, to the energy and mineral resources that have helped societies across the globe develop their economies. For centuries, we have relied on our ability to export as we have built the robust and modern economy from which we all benefit today. However, until recently, most Australians did not have cause to pay much attention to international trade. But, of course, that's changed in recent years. The imposition of trade impediments by the Chinese government on $20 billion worth of Australian exports highlighted the risk of putting all of your eggs in the one basket. Upon my appointment as Trade Minister and Tourism in 2022, working alongside the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, Senator Wong, we worked calmly and methodically to resolve those blockages for Australian businesses. Our patient and calibrated approach to stabilising the bilateral relationship with China, with of course not compromising our core interests and values, was vital in achieving the removal of these impediments. This means that our world-class wine, our beef, our lobster, and many other products are now back on the tables of Chinese consumers, benefiting Australian businesses and local jobs. This turnaround could not have been achieved without personal engagement. Now, I've now met my Chinese counterpart, Commerce Minister Weng Wentao, 10 times. Our government has also taken steps to deepen our economic ties with our nearest neighbours and increase opportunities with new partners further abroad. We've worked hard to strengthen our relationship in Southeast Asia, boosting two-way trade and investment with our closest region and reaching Australia's first free trade agreement in the Middle East when we signed the Australia-UAE agreement late last year. I look forward to visiting Abu Dhabi again very soon to turbocharge our investment. Getting our products, this is a little Woolies story, getting our products into the UAE is like getting it into the Woolies warehouse. If you can get it into there, then you can get it to all of the surrounding countries in the Middle East. I'm proud of what our government has achieved in the past 3 years, with solid foundations laid for continuing the work of building stronger and deeper trading relationships with our international partners. The diversification of our trade networks will open new opportunities for Australian exporters to ship their goods to the world and bring down the cost of living for Australians. Of course, diversification doesn't mean selling less to our largest trading partners, but it's all about selling more to new and other existing partners. As the Treasurer laid out in his recent address to the National Press Club, the Albanese Labor government has organised its economic policy for the second term around three priorities: productivity, economic resilience, and budget sustainability. Trade and investment support all of these priorities. Trade drives productivity through competition innovation, spurred by global competition. Trade enhances economic resilience by diversifying markets and supply chains. And trade contributes to budget sustainability by increasing revenues through exports and economic growth. Nearly a third of economic output is supported by trade. 1 in 4 Australian jobs is related to trade. And foreign investment provides the capital to build for the future and access to global talent, new ideas, best practices, and cutting-edge technologies. Business craves certainty to enable long-term investment and planning. For the past 8 decades, that certainly has been based on the institutions forged in the wreckage of World War II. From trade agreements that have allowed for the free flow of resources and capital, and the rules-based order, which has allowed for an even playing field, ushering in an unprecedented period of global economic growth. But these institutions and norms that we worked so hard to build are now being questioned, and the rules we wrote are being challenged. One of the chief designers of the global trading system, the United States, is now questioning the benefits of open, rules-based trade. The Trump administration is seeking to expand domestic manufacturing and influence the policies of its trading partners. Australia is a medium-sized open economy that is highly integrated with the global economy. We rely on being able to send our produce, our resources, our human capital to the world to sustain the high standards of living which we enjoy today. What we risk seeing is a shift from a system based on shared prosperity and interdependence to one based solely on power and size. We cannot risk a return to the law of the jungle. If our trading partners' growth slows, without doubt, we will suffer. The cost to consumers and businesses of a global economic slowdown will be felt for generations, and the shockwaves of inflation will worsen. Even before the imposition of tariffs by the current US administration, several other forces have been reshaping global trade for some time. Firstly, heightened geostrategic competition is increasing the intersection of national security and economic prosperity, made more complex by rapidly evolving technology that is enabling both extraordinary new growth and growing global competition. Secondly, the widespread use of industrial policy to support key sectors as a nation seeks to rebuild industrial bases and sovereign manufacturing capability to ensure technological dominance. And thirdly, the transition towards net zero emissions. These forces demand a more strategic, coordinated approach to trade policy, an approach that balances openness with resilience and long-term competitiveness. In 2025, we're no longer in a set-and-forget world. We can no longer afford to take the rules that underpin the stable trading system for granted. So, how will the Albanese Labor government navigate these challenges to best position Australia in a turbulent global economy? So, we'll be guided by 5 key principles. The first principle is that free and open markets are essential to Australia's prosperity. Imposing tariffs on ours would drive up the cost for Australian families and businesses. This position was backed by the Productivity Commission in its most recent Trade and Assistance Review released earlier this month. Our markets will remain open and we will stand by our trade agreements. In fact, we will try and make them even stronger. Our second principle is that world trade should be governed by rules and not by power alone. We will always stand up for Australian industry and Australian jobs by fighting for a level playing field for our businesses and workers, and by providing the right support to ensure our exporters are not locked out of the opportunities we have fought so hard for. The third principle is that of cooperation. We have and we will continue to take a good faith approach to trade negotiations, which means engaging with a genuine desire to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes and uphold the rules-based order that has benefited so many. The fourth principle is that we will not leave those affected behind: Australian businesses, workers, or the broader community. And as the Prime Minister said, no one held back and no one left behind. We will work hard to ensure that the benefits of trade are shared widely, which is why the Albanese government is putting so much effort into its inclusive trade policies, including our First Nations trade agenda. That agenda has already seen some big wins. The new international treaty recognising First Nations trading knowledge and a chapter specifically relating to First Nations trade is in our UAE agreement, which is the first time this has happened in any Australian trade agreement. The final principle is that we will not compromise our fundamental values and interest, like the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme or our biosecurity system. To be clear, the announcement made yesterday on the outcome of the technical assessment of beef from the United States is the culmination of a decade of science and risk-based import assessments and evaluations. Australia is the land of the fair go. We value social justice, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Programs like the PBS, which are at the heart of the health and the well-being of our country, will never be up for negotiation under an Albanese Labor government. And while we believe in free and fair trade, we will not trade away parts of our core identity. With these principles in mind, our government will continue to advance a trade policy that delivers for all Australians. During the election campaign, we are committed to initiatives that would provide support to businesses impacted by protectionist trade measures. This included strengthening of our anti-dumping regime to help create a level playing field to address unfair trade. In addition, we put $50 million on the table to work closely with key industry peak bodies, supporting businesses to find and access new market opportunities, and we will provide $1 billion in zero-interest loans to firms. We're also committed to establishing a strategic reserve for critical minerals so that we can make sure Australia can respond to trade and supply disruptions from a position of strength with our key partners. And we will put Australian businesses at the forefront for the queue for government procurement and contracts. This is in addition to implementing our Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040 and our roadmap for economic engagement with India. And by backing local manufacturing through a future Made in Australia policy, we will continue to invest in the skills, technology and renewable energy to make more things here, creating jobs and opportunities for Australians. Of course, our ability to compete abroad depends on how productive we are at home, which is why the government has an ambitious domestic productivity reform agenda. And that agenda depends in turn on the quality of our trade and investment connections to the world. As I alluded to earlier in my remarks, trade diversification will continue to be a key focus. We are fortunate to already have a strong network of 18 free trade agreements with 30 partners, covering almost 80% of the value of our two-way trade. But there's unfinished business. I'm committed to concluding with the European Union the missing piece of the puzzle of Australia's network of FTAs, and it's got a market of over 450 million consumers. Having met recently with my European counterpart, I know there is a genuine desire on both sides to reach an outcome. But it will require a Team Australia approach, both internationally and domestically with stakeholders, including businesses and farmers. And I'm committed to expanding our trade deal with India, the world's most populous nation with rapidly growing middle class. Just these two agreements bring in almost 2 billion new consumers for Australian products. And the good news is that my Indian counterpart, Piyush Goyal, and I have a shared vision to boost two-way trade and investment. I think there's a new energy in regional trade agreements where we will work with the region to back this trend. As chair of the CPTPP, it's much easier when it was just the TPP, Australia is seeking to expand the membership and deepen its high standards rules. And closer to home, in the Pacific, I want to ensure that the gains from trade are spread throughout our neighbourhood. Many Pacific Island partners tell us that they want to participate more fully in global supply chains. I want to talk to our friends like Fiji and Papua New Guinea to be part of our regional trading network that has worked so well for us. One of the key ingredients in development and poverty alleviation in Southeast Asia has been the story of opening up to trade. That's why so many of our neighbours are backing regionalism in trade as a response to the current turbulence. Because backing these norms of rules and openness backs our region's strength and its vitality. We will leverage the G20, the OECD and APEC to build support for continued openness around the world, acting as a calm and considered voice for trade across the world. Underpinning these bilateral and regional deals is the World Trade Organization, through which most global trade still flows according to its rules. Our message to the world is simple. We will continue to respect the rules and be a partner that you can count on. Shaping the rules of the road is in our DNA. We were founding members of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1948 and played a major role in the Uruguay round negotiations, which led to the creation of the WTO. Now we face a major challenge in global trade, a time when Australia can play its part as a calm, considered international partner, leveraging our relationships to support free and fair trade. The meeting of the World Trade Ministers in Cameroon in March next year must tackle the two big issues of WTO reform: how we make decisions, make new rules, and then enforce those rules. We've got to bring new agreements like the one we have helped create on e-commerce into the WTO rulebook. We must also make progress on agriculture, where there's been a tilted playing field for far too long. Australian businesses, workers and consumers are on the front line of this new era of global trade policy. That's why we will back businesses with real, practical support to assist Australian exporters to seize the new opportunities created by our trade deals. The government is committed to genuine consultation to ensure that our approach both reflects our community's experience and meets our nation's expectations. Taking an economy-wide approach has allowed us to navigate these last few months of tariff disruption successfully. It's only with that same approach that we can navigate through the period of uncertainty ahead, and to ensure that Australia isn't just a passive witness to our circumstances, but instead shapes them, as we've key points before in our history. A new trading landscape we face is difficult and challenging, but we have the courage of our convictions. We know that open, rules-based trade and investment works. Our outward-looking trade and investment policy is central to this government's ambitions for our economy. From our earliest days, Australia has always been a trading nation. Our businesses, our people and our communities all benefit from it. And we will continue to be a successful trading nation if we can both lift our performance at home and shape our circumstances abroad. With the genuine Team Australia approach, I'm confident that we're up to that task. Thank you very much. Thank you. Glass of water.
Don, thank you for those very thoughtful and clear remarks, and thank you for taking our questions. I was especially struck by that line that trade should be governed by rules, not power alone, and I might come back to that later. But let me kick off. I'm going to ask the Minister a number of questions, and then there's going to be an opportunity to go to the audience. So if you've got a question, get ready to stick your hand in the air. Let me start with the breaking news that you referred to about adjusting import rules for beef. You referred in your remarks to a decade of assessments and evaluations. The US Department of Agriculture released a statement crediting President Trump for the change and calling it a major breakthrough. To what extent will this change the dynamic with the administration? Will this get us closer to a bilateral trade deal with the United States?
The short answer to that, Michael, is I'm not too sure. What I do know is that 10 years ago, when Barnaby Joyce was the Agriculture Minister, we started this process of reviewing the entitlement of the Americans to import their beef into Australia. And then 5 years ago, under Agriculture Minister Littleproud, we took that a little step forward. And this is now the culmination of that inquiry. We have experts, Australian experts, scientists in this area, who make these decisions all the time. You know, countries are entitled to apply to import their products to Australia. We have very strict biosecurity laws, and we apply them very strictly, and that's why so much of Australian produce is disease-free, and we have a clean and green image overseas for our products. The flip side of that, of course, is that if we want to trade with other countries like America, we do $4 billion worth of beef exports to the United States, and it's increasing, by the way. We export huge amounts of beef to China. Again, that's increasing. We've just done a new trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Our beef exports to the United Kingdom are up 500% from where they were. We haven't done this in order to entice the Americans into a trade agreement. We think that they should do that anyway. We think the Americans should honour the terms of our free trade agreement. It's been 20 years since we signed that free trade agreement. It's very clear. All the tariffs that, all the products that come from America come to Australia tariff-free. We expect the Americans to do the same. So my job, the job of the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, is to convince the Americans that they're actually going down the wrong path in terms of applying these tariffs. They're actually counterproductive. They're going to push up inflation and push up unemployment. So however the Americans themselves might view this decision, the fact of the matter is that my job and the job of the government, just as we did with China, we had $20 billion worth of tariffs and other impediments on our goods when we came into government. We sat down and patiently worked through all of those issues. We've got to do the same with the Americans. Whether this is a good or a bad decision from the point of view of the Americans, obviously President Trump thinks it's a good decision, taking credit for it. We have to pursue our national interest, and our national interest is the removal of all of those tariffs.
Well, good luck persuading President Trump on that tariff question, because he has said that tariff is his very favourite word in the Oxford English Dictionary, so you've got a mountain to climb. Can I ask you about the nexus between tariffs and trade and defence spending in the US relationship? You would have noticed last month that when Spain, for example, was the outlier and didn't go to 5% defence spending, that's 3.5% on core defence and 1.5% on defence-related investments, President Trump threatened they would have to spend twice as much in tariffs to make up for it. Have you encountered that connection between, in your discussions with the Americans, between defence spending and tariffs?
No. Well, you might recall in the course of the early part of the Trump administration, Mr. Dutton, leader of the opposition, Dutton, sought to link defence and trade and said we should throw the defence relationship in with the trade relationship. The Prime Minister was very clear, we would not do that and we will not do that. There's two separate issues there. We have a long-standing defence relationship with the United States. My grandfather fought in France and Belgium in 1917 and 1980 with the Americans. My father fought in Darwin, 1942 to 1945, with the Americans, and I think in just about every other war since then we've fought with them. They are our strategic defence partner, and there's nothing that this government will do that seeks to impede that. Now, in none of the discussions I've had, and I've had now 5 conversations with Commerce Secretary Lutnick and USTR Greer, have they linked the two relationships? And I don't see them being connected. We have an issue with the Americans, the way they're applying tariffs. I mean, admittedly, we have the lowest tariffs of any country, but still too high. But we are not at any stage going to link the two. We'll make decisions about our defence interests, of course, based on our national interest. We are spending record amounts of money on our defence. You know, we believe in AUKUS. We want all those submarines built in South Australia by very fine workers. We're going to continue to prosecute that argument, but we're not going to link the two.
All right, let me come to China. The PM was just in China for 5 or 6 days. He had a warm lunch with President Xi Jinping in which he said they each discussed their backgrounds, and the PM said that shows an element of trust. Is that really how Chinese leaders operate in your experience? Is it about personal relationships? I mean, this is a country, as you know better than anybody, that until recently had erected trade blockages against us, put us in the naughty corner. Should we be trusting China?
Look, what we should be doing with China is building a relationship where we are able to express to them our issues and our national interest, and they're entitled to do the same. As I said in my speech, I've now met with my counterpart, Wang Wentao, 10 times, more than any other trade minister around the world. And we have frank conversations, sometimes very difficult conversations. But it's only through that direct face-to-face discussion, I think, that you can get an appreciation of what their issues are, and they can get an appreciation of ours. The significance of the Chinese relationship is they are by far our largest trading partner. If you total up the next 5 trading partners, they still don't count for as much as trade as we do with China. And unlike our relationship with the United States, the trade relationship with China is overwhelmingly in our favour. So last year, $330 billion worth of trade, $100 billion what we bought from the Chinese, $230 billion what they bought from us. Now, compare that with the United States. Our total trade with the United States is only just over $23 billion. So our trade with China is at least 10 times larger than our trade with the United States. And just think for a moment about these tariffs, okay? The American government is imposing tariffs on that $23 billion worth of product we sell into the United States. This government got back $20 billion worth of business. So almost as much as our total trade with the United States we got back in the last 3 years. So our relationship with China is a vital economic relationship. So many jobs. When those impediments were imposed, on wine, on barley, on beef, on 12 other products, it very significantly affected the Australian economy. I saw overnight former Prime Minister Morrison said, "Oh, well, you've got to accept the pain." Well, he's not a small businessman trying to make a buck selling wine, or a farmer, or a barley grower. So it had an impact, and we can still put our argument to the Chinese. We can still differ with the Chinese, but we can also stabilise the relationship so that we continue to benefit from that economic relationship. So, what did LBJ say? You can walk and chew gum together. Well, we can do that. We can have an honest relationship with China. We can tell them where we disagree, but we can also have that economic relationship.
In your experience, do the Americans worry about the thickness of the economic connections between Australia and China? Are we likely to come under pressure to limit trade or, for example, not purchase Chinese EVs, for example?
If they're going to go down that track, they haven't told us that yet. And look, President Trump negotiated the agreement with the UK. What was the next country that he did his negotiations with? Well, it was China. And there's already talk that he's going to go and visit China sometime soon. So I don't think you can predict at this point in time where the relationship between the United States and China will end up. All we can do is represent our national interests. And our national interest right now is having a strategic military relationship with the United States and continuing to sell our fantastic products into the Chinese market. That's all we can do right now.
All right, let me go to other parts of the world. Let me come to Europe. You said in your remarks that we're committed to concluding that FTA with the EU. It was reported in June in the Financial Review, I think, that Ursula von der Leyen was going to come to Australia. Actually, I think they said in July to sign that deal. That hasn't happened. We wouldn't mind having Ursula von der Leyen speak at the Lowy Institute, actually, Minister.
I shall organise it.
Thank you for that. Should we expect her soon? What are the main sticking points? How quickly could we do a deal with the Europeans?
Okay. So in the first 3 years of the Albanese government, we had 2 cracks at finalising a free trade agreement. In all honesty, we got quite close to an agreement, but the outstanding issues, we were a long way apart. And that's particularly so in respect to the agriculture sector. We wanted greater access, particularly for our beef and our lamb. The Europeans have a political problem, particularly in places like France, Ireland and Poland, with giving us that greater access, and primarily the agreement fell over because they weren't prepared to give us a better offer. Now, I've had one video conference and one face-to-face meeting with my new Trade Commissioner, Šefčovič from Slovakia. I only employ people now who speak Slovakian, which he's very pleased about, because not many people speak Slovakian. I was arrested in Slovakia, but that's another story. And I've told
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, later on. Yeah. I was with Senator Mark Bishop. There you go. This bloke is the fellow who negotiated the Brexit deal. People said, no, you'll never get an agreement with the UK. And he did. He got that Brexit deal done. So he's highly regarded as a negotiator, and I have a sense that by comparison to the previous occupant of the position, I think we can negotiate with them. Their problem is that late last year, they signed finally, after 15 years of negotiation, signed an agreement with Mercosur, so that's the South American countries, which also has an issue about beef. They told me that they were going to get that agreement approved by the EU Commission in the course of July, and then they're coming to us. That hasn't happened yet. And France, I think, is continuing to oppose that agreement. And if, for instance, Italy joined France in that opposition, then they wouldn't have the two-thirds majority to get it through the European Commission. I think, irrespective of whether that agreement gets up or doesn't get up, we will have a successful negotiation with the EU. I think it's important that those countries that believe in free and fair trade can show the rest of the world it is still possible to reach free trade agreements. So I think there's a national interest on both sides of the equation to get that agreement up, and I'm going to do my level best. It will require some compromises in our negotiations, but I think the imperative here is to show the rest of the world we're fair dinkum about free and open trade, and we can do agreements with other countries.
So Australian industry will have to step up basically in the national interest. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying exactly that.
All right. Let me ask you about India. In 2021, we agreed a limited deal economic cooperation and trade agreement. We haven't managed to get the broader economic cooperation agreement across the line. I think Prime Minister Modi signed a trade deal in London yesterday with Keir Starmer. Obviously, it's in our interest to develop a much closer relationship with India. Update us on the India talks, if you
Yeah, so we were very close to an agreement before the election, and probably if the election had been a week or so later, we might have finalised an agreement. I've got a very good relationship with the Indian Trade Minister, Piyush Goyal. In fact, he's been to our vineyard in the Clare Valley, and I'm told since he's gone back to India, he can't stop talking about Australian food and wine.
Did he drink the Godfather too?
He did,
yeah.
Yes, he did, and that's, I'm told, his favourite Cabernet now. So we've built a really good relationship with him. He just hosted the South Australian Governor, the former head of DFAT, Frances Adamson, and treated her, very respectfully. As you say, they've got an agreement with the UK. That was quite a long time in coming, and really only catches up to where we were a couple of years ago. Their big problem, of course, is that they also face hefty tariffs from the United States, and they're quite focused on that. I think we will get another agreement with India in the very near future, but I think we have to look at India as an incremental growth. They're a democracy. They have constituents that, if they don't like a particular aspect of the agreement, will have genuine protests. I think the way we will get to a final comprehensive agreement with India is in bits and pieces. We've got an agreement now, we'll get an agreement with some other things, and then we'll have to keep talking with them. So I think the India challenge is a longer term one, and we've got to be respectful of their own internal workings, just as they have to be for us.
All right, let me ask you about the WTO. As you know, we hosted the Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala in 2022, and George Minor was key in bringing that together for us. Nobody seems to be talking that much about the WTO at the moment. They're in difficulties ever since President Trump stopped appointing members to the appellate body in its first term. This year they've suspended funding for the organisation. How important is the WTO? What's its future?
Well, it's vital to Australia, and I was in Paris 2 months ago. We had Australia chaired 2 meetings, one of the OECD and one of the WTO. They were the best attended meetings in pretty much the history of the WTO in terms of the seniority of the trade ministers who turned up those meetings. So I wouldn't agree that nobody's focused on the WTO. I think the rest may not be. The Americans turned up too. Greer, I had 2 meetings with Jamison Greer at those meetings. So look, I do think the rest of the countries of the world do see a future for the WTO. You're right, the appellate processes have been blocked by the United States. Interestingly, even under Biden, that wasn't reversed. So it looks now to be, something of a permanent position of both the Republicans and the Democrats. And I was disappointed in that. I thought Gina Raimondo might have been prepared to bite the bullet there, but they weren't. I think there's a future for the WTO. I think we will make progress next year at Cameroon. And the fact that Jamison Greer was there participating is an indication that the Americans have not yet given up. And some of the positions that the Americans are taking give me some confidence that they won't be pulling out of the WTO anytime soon.
All right, let me ask you one domestic question, then I'm going to come to the audience. You mentioned in your remarks that one of the priorities for the government is boosting productivity. I saw that ACTU Secretary Sally McManus blamed sluggish productivity on poor management and said that the perspective of workers has been missing from the debate, which has been too focused on cost cutting. What do you say to that, and what is the answer for Australia's productivity dilemma?
Well, I can tell you, in my space, one answer is a simplified trade system. We have one of the most inefficient systems where people import and export. Sometimes you've got to sign up or fill out as much as 30 forms, pretty much saying all the same thing before you can import or export your products. We are now listed as number 129th least efficient trading countries in terms of getting access into and out of our port. So one area where I'm encouraging the Treasurer to look at is that simplified trade system. Singapore's done it. Very simple system. No reason why Australia can't do it. And I'm going to be working with my cabinet colleagues to make some progress. Well, Sally's, of course, representing the ACTU, representing workers. Obviously, if we can improve productivity, by the workers and businesses working together, that's the much preferred position of the Australian government. When Bob Hawke came to government, of course, he initiated the Accord, which was all about, workers getting benefits and companies improving their productivity. I think we can do the same.
All right, who would like to ask a question of the Trade Minister? I can see Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald. I'll give you the first call, Matthew.
Thanks, Mr. Farrell, for your talk today. Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald. Just a quick two-parter, if I could. On the US front, what is realistically the best that Australia could hope for in a negotiation? No other country in the world has managed to get an exemption from the 10% baseline tariff. Is it fanciful to think we could? Is the best we could hope for a reduction or something happening with the steel and aluminium tariffs? And secondly, would the government support either China and or Taiwan entering the CPTPP?
All right, thank you, Matthew. Look, we haven't given up on reducing that 10% tariff from the United States. When I came to this job 3 years ago, when we had a 220% tariff on Australian wine and an 80% tariff on barley, I was told by people, you'll never ever get that removed. And of course, by the end of last year, we had every impediment and every tariff removed. I think eventually the Americans will come to the realisation that tariffs are an act of self-harm. They're actually pushing up their inflation, pushing up their unemployment, and reducing the retirement benefits of their workers. So I don't think we should give up on the ambition to get those tariffs removed. Let's look at aluminium, right? There's a reason why America imports aluminium from Australia. And to the best of my knowledge, there might be somebody in the room who knows better than me on this, But we haven't, since those tariffs, we haven't reduced the amount of aluminium that we're supplying to the United States. President Trump's argument is, well, the reason I'm imposing these tariffs is because I want companies to produce aluminium in the United States. Well, that's fine, but it's probably 10 or 15 years before you can establish a new aluminium plant and get it up and running. So the immediate effect of what the President has done, he hasn't reduced the amount of aluminium, certainly not coming from Australia, but he's not going to get the benefits of jobs and investment for years and years and years. So in the intervening period, what that means is for every product that the American manufacturers produce, they're now paying a much higher cost, which means when he sells those products overseas, they're now more expensive. Go figure. How does that work? So I think they'll discover, to his disappointment, I mean, the reason America introduced tariffs in the first place was Alexander Hamilton. They just won the Revolutionary War against the English. The soldiers hadn't been paid. The states, the 13 states, controlled all of the revenue raising. The federal government, even though it was a brand new government, had no income of itself. So Hamilton set up 13 stations along the east coast of America and started collecting tariffs. That's why the Americans started. But, you know, over time, they've realised that, you know, that was a mistake. And, you know, the last 80 years, the Americans have led the way to free and fair trade. I think they'll eventually come back to that position because, you know, when push comes to shove, ultimately they'll decide that it doesn't, it's an act of economic self-harm. As to China and Taiwan, well, we are chairing the CPTPP. We have just added the United Kingdom for the first time into the group. I think the immediate view of most of the members of that group is that let's settle it down with the UK and then work out who might be the next candidate. And we're already looking at Costa Rica as an additional partner. I think what we need to do is work out a set of criteria and a procedure for adding countries to that agreement. EU have already expressed an interest in joining. As you say, China, Taiwan, many other countries would like to see that agreement. It's a good agreement, very good agreement for Australia. But we need to work through just how we're going to add additional countries to that agreement.
All right, thank you. This gentleman in the third row.
Thank you. James Crawford from CBUS. Senator Farrell, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I want to take a slightly different step to Matthew. I want to say if things go disastrously wrong with the US negotiations and we don't make any great progress, and I'd love the fact if you were right, I have less faith in the leader of the free world changing his mind on tariffs, unfortunately. But if that doesn't go through, it's great that you're looking to diversify through the India and European free trade agreements, but that sounds incremental. What's the government going to do to make sure that Australian industries don't get left behind if that does take place? What more can you do to support the Australian industry?
If we don't remove tariffs?
Yeah.
Well, what President Trump is saying to us and the rest of the world is, we want to buy less of your products. That's what a tariff does. It reduces the amount of product that you sell into the United States. Now, strangely enough, that actually hasn't happened so far with most Australian products, so that's an interesting fact. But what we have to do is diversify our trading relationship. Now, for instance, that doesn't mean selling anything less into China. I actually think we can sell more product into China, but we've got to find other markets. And that's why India and the EU, the UAE, UK, are just so important to our economy. Who would have thought that we are now selling 500% more beef in less than 2 years into the United Kingdom? One of the arguments that the previous Trade Minister of the EU raised with me, he said, you're cutting our lunch in the UK. That used to be our market that we were...
Actually, used to be out back in 1973.
It was, yes, very good point, until they stole it. But no, my job is to find other markets. And here we have Southeast Asia on our doorstep. We used to fly over Southeast Asia to deliver goods to Japan, South Korea and China. And yet here's one of the fastest growing markets in the world, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. Many of the leaders of those countries have studied in Australia. We've provided their education. We're very well received. I married my wife 42 years ago in Manila. So there are 400,000 Filipinos in Australia, about the same number of Vietnamese. Just go through the list. We've got this great opportunity to build business relationships. When I was married 42 years ago, the population of the Philippines was 60 million. When we went back for my wife's dad's birthday, Christmas time, 120 million. So they've increased their population by 60 million in those 40 years, so more than twice the Australian population. The economy of the Philippines growing at 6%. You know, everyone says, oh, how good China is at 5%. Vietnam. So the opportunities are there, and I think we should be more focused on that. And I think superannuation funds can be very helpful in that process. And I think if you can be a little bit more ambitious in where you make your investments into the region, into Indonesia, into the Philippines, into Malaysia, Singapore. Singapore loves doing business with us. So there are so many opportunities in our region that if America says, okay, well, you know, we're going to take less of your product, we can find other markets much closer to home.
I thought one thing that was interesting about that answer, Don, was that a few years ago, all the discussion was about diversifying our trade away from China. You're saying, actually, we can sell more product into China.
So the first thing that the Chinese Trade Minister did when I met him in Paris a couple of weeks ago, he invited me to the world's largest trade fair, which is his bailiwick. Last year, we took a record number of Australian companies there, 253. On the first day alone, we did $1 billion worth of new business. I said, when I first came to this job, well, our trade relationship, you know, was worth 330 billion. No reason why it can't be 400 billion. Peter Dutton then just topped me, and he said, no, our trade relationship should double to 600 billion. So there are wonderful opportunities. I mean, think about this. The Chinese economy is roughly worth $18 trillion a year. It is growing by 5% a year, so roughly an extra $1 trillion worth of income to Chinese consumers. What do we know when those people move from poverty into the middle class? Well, they want better food, they want better wine, they want a whole lot of other things. So I think there are still opportunities as the middle class in China grow to sell more and more. When I first went to China, you go into a supermarket, used to be an Australian steak next door to an American one. You go there now, there's only Australian steaks there. But we're back to having all your eggs in the one basket. We have to diversify so that if something goes wrong with the Chinese relationship, then we've got alternative markets, or the American market. I mean, who knows, you know, where this, you know, might end. But we have an opportunity now because our reputation is so good for clean and green product to export more. And, you know, where's the fastest growing, you know, middle class population? Southeast Asia and India.
I'm going to squeeze in one more question. Don, and I want to come back to Mr. Trump because you have been involved throughout your career in a lot of tough negotiations with Coles, with Woolies, with Brussels, with Washington. At some point, I presume the Prime Minister is going to meet with President Trump. And you've been in a lot of difficult meetings where you've had to develop a rapport with your counterpart, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything. We've seen some leaders really trip over in the Oval Office. Some get monstered by the President.
Yes.
You've seen others like Mr. Starmer who've been a bit more successful. What would your advice be to your boss about how to deal with someone like Mr. Trump who prides himself on the art of the deal?
No, the only better negotiator in the Australian Parliament is Prime Minister Albanese. I'm not going to be proffering any advice to him. But look, the reality is, I mean, people say, well, how have you built this relationship with China and Wen Wentao? I say, look, you treat them the same way that you would like to be treated yourself. And I think that's the trick. I'm sure Prime Minister Albanese will be very successful when he finally gets a face. I mean, he's had 2 conversations with him, and okay, it's over the phone. They've both been good conversations, I think, very positive conversation. President Trump thinks fondly of Australia. He has many Australian friends. So I wouldn't be too worried about that face-to-face meeting, and I'm sure that when it happens, it'll be successful, and that our relationship with the United States is still heading in the right direction.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Senator Farrell, thank you very much for giving a substantive speech. Thanks for taking our questions.
Thanks, Michael.
Good.